A cop mocked his stutter. The courtroom laughed. But when Dante Wilkins, 17, quiet, and overlooked, stood up with a torn constitution and a name they'd forgotten, the truth hit harder than anyone expected. Turns out, the officer who arrested him once owed his life to Dante's father. This story isn't about shouting. It's about the power of not backing down. If that speaks to you, stay with us. And if you believe quiet courage deserves to be heard, hit subscribe. Here, we amplify the voices no one else will. Lincoln Park always looked tired on Mondays. The kind of tired that didn't come from the leaves falling off the trees, or the fog that dragged its feet through the playground, but from something older, like a city's bones aching under the weight of silence. At exactly 7:42 a.m., a boy walked through that silence. Not rushed, not slow. He walked like someone trying not to disturb the ground too much, like maybe the earth had already had a hard night and didn't need another reason to complain. His name was Dante Wilkins, but the world hadn't bothered to learn it yet. He was 17, rail thin, with a jacket 2 sizes too big and a backpack that had more holes than zippers. His shoes had no soles in the center. You could see the sidewalk through them if he stood in the right light. In his hand was a phone, scratched, old, held together by a blue rubber band. The front camera didn't work. The screen flickered if he turned it sideways too fast, but that phone was everything. That phone had proof. That phone had saved him twice already. And today, without knowing why, he felt like he might need it again. Across the street, 2 cops were standing over a man lying on a bench. Not lying, sitting maybe, but with his head bowed low and his hands open in his lap. A veteran. Everyone knew him. Mr. Randall. Old, soft-spoken, a little unstable in the head since '03. He had a dog too, Max. A German shepherd with cloudy eyes but a loyalty that hadn't faded 1 inch. Dante saw the posture, the tension. The way Officer Greer leaned in with his hand on his holster, even though Randall wasn't even looking up. He didn't think. He just lifted the phone and started recording. 10 feet away, not a word. Just zoomed in slowly, letting the camera speak. The audio picked up Greer's voice first, low, threatening. "You sleeping here again, Randall? Told you last week, this bench ain't your damn hotel." Randall didn't answer. Max let out a soft whimper, tail curling under. Briggs, the younger officer, snorted. "Bet he spent that VA check on whiskey again. Dog probably ain't eaten in days." And then it happened. Greer turned. Saw Dante. Phone raised out, his mouth tightened. "Put that down." Dante didn't move. I said, "Put the damn phone down. I'm on public ground." Dante stuttered, voice barely above the breeze. Briggs chuckled. "You hear that, Rick? We got a little legal expert over here." Greer took 2 steps toward the boy. The fog parted just enough for the early sun to catch the silver badge on his chest. "Kid, you better listen. Don't make me ask again." Dante's fingers trembled. He knew the law, or at least he thought he did. He'd read the pamphlet from the community center. You have the right to record public officials on public property. But knowing something in theory and standing your ground in front of 2 officers twice your size were not the same thing. Still, he held the phone. Briggs moved faster than Greer, grabbed Dante's wrist and twisted. The phone fell, bouncing once before landing in a puddle. "You interfering with police work," he snapped. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Dante's mouth opened, but no words came out. Just air, stuck like too many letters trying to escape at once. He looked at Randall, who looked at no one. "You can't, yeah? Watch me." The cuffs clicked shut. A woman standing near the crosswalk gasped, pulling her toddler closer. An old man shook his head but said nothing. A jogger slowed for half a second, then kept going. Nobody stepped forward. Greer leaned down to pick up the phone. "Trash," he muttered. "Not even worth breaking." And then, the moment that would end up going viral, though no one knew it yet, happened. As Greer turned to walk Dante to the squad car, the boy looked up, still trembling, still cuffed. I just wanted to make sure you didn't hurt him, Greer blinked. For a half second, something in his face shifted. Not guilt, more like surprise that this barely speaking kid had the nerve to accuse him of anything, but it was too late. The camera had already captured it. From the phone lying face up in the puddle, cracked, yes, but still recording. They processed him at the precinct like they always do, slowly, like time didn't belong to poor people. He sat on a metal bench in the hallway for 40 minutes before someone even asked his name. When they did, he had to say it twice. Dante Wilkins. Age: Sus 717. Charges: obstruction, disturbing the peace, and resisting. He blinked. I never. The officer didn't look up. Just handed him the charge sheet and pointed to the waiting room. He sat there alone for another hour, chewing his thumbnail, stomach hollow, fear chewing back. He'd called his mom from the desk phone. She didn't answer. Probably working her morning shift at the diner. Probably couldn't afford to miss it. Not for this. A public defender walked in eventually. Middle-aged, thin lips, folders under one arm. He looked at Dante like a problem, not a person. You talk? Dante nodded. You got a record? Dante shook his head. The lawyer exhaled. Should be a quick one. You'll probably just get probation. I didn't do. Yeah, they all say that. He didn't mean it cruelly. He meant it like someone who's seen too many lost battles. But Dante didn't want a deal. He wanted to speak. Not just with his voice, but with the words he'd read over and over since he was 10, sitting on the cold library floor while the other kids played outside. The Constitution. The First Amendment. Glick v. Cunningham. Fordyce. Turner. He didn't memorize them for school. He memorized them for moments like this. He just never thought the moment would come so soon. When the judge asked if he wanted to waive counsel, he said yes. And when she raised her brow and said, "You sure you want to represent yourself, Mr. Wilkins?" He nodded. His hands were shaking. But not from fear, from knowing. Knowing this wasn't just about him. There's a silence that lives in courtrooms, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that clings to your skin like sweat in a church pew. It's the silence that says, we've already made up our minds. Now show us how wrong you are. Dante Wilkins walked through that silence wearing the only blazer he owned, a faded navy hand-me-down from a cousin he barely spoke to. It didn't quite fit. The sleeves were too long, and the shoulders slumped. His collar was crooked, and the tie his mother helped him knot that morning was a little too tight. But he held his head high, or tried to. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it was full enough. On the left, the prosecutor's bench, with Assistant District Attorney Layla Warren already flipping through papers, uninterested. On the right, two uniformed officers sat stiffly, Officer Greer and Officer Briggs. Greer's expression was blank, practiced. Briggs had that smirk again, the kind that says, I already won. In the back, scattered seats held bailiffs, a few reporters, and a handful of bored law clerks. One old man read the newspaper. A woman in pearls typed furiously on a laptop. And three teenagers here for a civics class whispered and giggled until their teacher gave them a sharp look. And then there were the stairs. The bailiff called the case. The People versus Dante Wilkins. He stood, or tried to. His knees locked for a second. His breath stuttered like his voice. But then he straightened. Hands clenched at his sides. And walked to the podium. He could feel them watching, not just looking, but judging. A 17-year-old black boy, defending himself. With a stutter. Against seasoned attorneys and sworn officers, he might as well have walked in wearing a clown nose. The judge adjusted her glasses. Her name was Evelyn Marsh, a veteran on the bench, known for her efficiency and her poker face. She was white. In her 60s, and had a reputation for giving young defendants tough love. She peered over her bench. "Mr. Wilkins, you've declined legal counsel, is that correct?" Why yes, Your Honor." Marsh snickers. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a paper cut you don't notice until it stings. Marsh raised a hand. "This is not a classroom. Anyone laughing again will be escorted out. Understood?" Silence. But the damage was done. Dante could feel it in his chest, that heat. The one that rises when your voice betrays you before your mind can catch up. Ada Warren stood. Her tone was almost bored. "Your Honor, the people are prepared to move forward with our evidence." The defendant was observed filming police officers during an active investigation, refused to comply with verbal commands, and was arrested after physically resisting detainment. Dante flinched. That wasn't what happened. Not even close, but no one looked surprised. No one seemed bothered, not until the janitor stood up. He was sitting in the last row, quiet as a shadow until he wasn't. Tall, black, 60-something. Wore a faded work shirt that said Roosevelt High Maintenance in blue thread above the chest pocket. "Your Honor," he said. The judge blinked. "Sir, you're not permitted to speak." "Apologies," he said calmly. "But if you're about to let this boy get railroaded without hearing what kind of mind he has, then I'd rather be thrown out than stay quiet." She hesitated. He nodded toward Dante. "That boy reads more law books than my whole graduating class. Spends Saturdays in the library instead of on corners." Their conversation was hushed, but Dante could still see the tension in their posture. Marsh asked one question, and then another. Finally, she leaned back and waved them off. When they returned to their seats, Greer looked less sure. "Briggs." No longer SMIRKED. As the prosecutor resumed her questions, the atmosphere had changed. No longer was the courtroom watching a boy struggle to speak. They were watching a young man challenge the very assumptions that brought him there. He may have stuttered through the law, but he never stumbled on the truth. When the prosecutor returned to her seat, there was a noticeable tension in the air, not from conflict, but from restraint. Something had shifted. Even if no one was ready to admit it out loud. Dante turned a page in his binder. Not fast, he moved like someone who had practiced each gesture in front of a mirror. Like someone who had spent more nights in the library than at parties, more mornings walking to school than riding a bus because the route didn't reach his block. He faced the judge again. Your Honor, I'd like to request the body cam footage be shown." The judge nodded. "Granted." A bay leaf rolled in the monitor. The footage began, shaky, low quality, but clear enough. The officers' voices echoed off the courtroom walls. "You sleeping here again, Randall? Bet he spent that VA check on whiskey. Put that phone down." And then, the moment, Dante's voice, thin, scared, but firm. I'm on public ground, sir." Then the scuffle. The cuffs. The phone falling. And the quiet sentence barely caught by the mic. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't hurt him." The courtroom was dead silent. No commentary. No objections. Just silence. A type of silence deeper than the one that greeted him when he first entered. This one wasn't built from judgment. It was built from realization. In the back row, the reporter slowly put down her pen. Next to her, one of the three teenagers who had been giggling earlier now sat forward, elbows on knees, watching Dante with wide eyes. On the bench, the judge leaned back slightly. Not far, just enough for someone who'd spent decades pretending to be unmoved to allow herself one moment of shift. She looked down at Dante. "Anything further?" He nodded once. I'd like to read one last thing." He pulled a paper from the inside pocket of his coat, folded, neat, handwritten in cursive ink. "My dad wrote this to me when I was 12. He was serving overseas." He didn't look up as he read. "Son, one day they might not hear you the first time." They might not understand the words you're trying to say. But don't let that stop you. Because your truth doesn't need perfect grammar to be powerful. Speak it anyway. Dante folded the letter slowly. I'm speaking now, he said, and for the first time that morning, he smiled, not big, not showy. Just enough to mean. I'm still standing in that moment. Even the courtroom couldn't pretend anymore. The whispers started, small things, he's good. Did you hear how he quoted case law? He's just a kid, but damn. Even the janitor, the man with worn boots and grease-stained hands, gave a quiet nod and stood up again. Your Honor, he said gently, I'd like to offer character testimony when the time comes. I've seen this boy do more thinking than most lawyers I've met. The judge looked at Dante one more time, not through him, at him. She didn't say anything. Just took her glasses off, cleaned them slowly, and wrote something in her notes. Dante stepped away from the podium. Hands no longer clenched, feet no longer stiff. He walked back to his seat, not triumphant, but steady, like someone who knew his truth had finally landed, not in everyone's heart, but in enough of them. And in a world where so many doors stayed shut, enough was a miracle. It was only after the lunch recess that the courtroom began to shift from a battle of laws to something far more human. Dante sat quietly at his table. No lawyer beside him, no family in the rows behind him. Just a binder, a worn copy of the Constitution, and a folded letter from his father in his breast pocket like armor. The janitor, Mr. Ellis, as the court would soon learn, returned from the hallway with a brown paper bag and a can of orange soda. He set them quietly on the bench beside Dante, who whispered a soft, "Thank you," barely audible. Ellis only nodded. When Judge Marsh re-entered, the bailiff called for order, but something about the room felt different. Not quieter, more attentive. As if the audience had stopped waiting for a trial and had started watching a story unfold. Prosecutor resumed with her witnesses, but there was hesitation now. She called Officer Greer to the stand. His testimony was textbook, rigid, recited, lacking detail beyond the checklist of charges. She asked about the incident. He answered with mechanical precision. Did the defendant interfere with your duties? Yes, ma'am. Did he comply with your requests? No, ma'am. Was he aggressive? Greer paused, just long enough. No. But he was resistant. That pause was all it took. Dante stood slowly. Your Honor, may I cross-examine the witness? Marsh tilted her head. Proceed. Dante approached the stand, binder in hand. His knees locked momentarily. He took a breath. Officer Greer, did I raise my voice? No. Did I get close to you or Officer B. Briggs? No. Was I between you and the man you were speaking with? Greer shifted. No. Dante looked down at his notes, then back up. Then what made me a threat? Silence. Even the prosecutor looked up from her papers. Greer opened his mouth. Closed it. Dante waited. Greer finally said, You were filming. Dante nodded slowly. Was that illegal? No, but you didn't want me to. Greer said nothing. Dante turned to the judge. No further questions. The room felt like it had exhaled for the first time in hours. The next witness called was unexpected. The janitor. Mr. Ellis. He walked to the front of the courtroom, without notes, without preparation, and sat at the stand like someone who'd seen more justice in a mop bucket than most men had seen from the bench. The judge raised an eyebrow. State your full name. Samuel Ellis, former Staff Sergeant, U.S. Marine Corps, currently head custodian, Roosevelt High. Even the court reporter looked up at that. Ellis folded his hands. I've known Dante Wilkins for 2 years, he said, his voice steady. Not through church, not through family, through repetition. Because every Saturday, That boy walks 3 miles to the public library, checks out case law, then sits at the far table, always the one near the broken heater, and studies. He paused. He doesn't say much. Because when he does, folks interrupt, laugh, look confused. He looked out at the courtroom, but when he reads, ain't no stutter in the room. The judge listened in silence. The prosecutor stood. Mr. Ellis, are you aware that your testimony is not legally expert? Ellis nodded. I'm not a lawyer, ma'am, but I know a fighter when I see one. Objection, she said quietly. Sustained. The judge replied, but gently. Ellis leaned forward anyway. He didn't learn the law to win. He learned it to survive. And just like that, the courtroom changed again. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was the unveiling of a boy who had spent years being overlooked, only to now stand alone in the place that once would have silenced him completely. Mr. Ellis stepped down from the witness stand like a soldier leaving an old battlefield, not triumphant, not broken, just steady. As he passed Dante, he gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Not a pat, not a squeeze, just pressure. A transfer of something heavier than words. A quiet declaration. You're not alone in this. Dante sat quietly at the defense table. No lawyer beside him, no family in the courtroom pews. Just his binder, his worn copy of the Constitution, and the folded letter from his father resting over his heart like armor. Mr. Ellis returned to his seat, back row, far right. And though he didn't say a word, the room seemed to settle. People weren't just watching a trial anymore. They were watching something shift. Then, something unexpected happened. A clerk approached the bench, whispering to Judge Marsh as she reviewed a document handed to her. It's from Ret. Lt. Colonel Thomas Mitchell, she said softly. He's asking to testify as a surprise. Witness. The courtroom stiffened. Who is that? Ada Warren asked. The clerk replied evenly. He was the commanding officer of Sergeant Elijah Wilkins, the defendant's father. The air thinned. The judge looked at Dante. Mr. Wilkins. Do you know this man? Dante nodded. Yes, ma'am. He was friends with my dad. He sends books, sometimes. You understand what it means to let him testify? Yes, ma'am. 10 minutes later, the double doors opened. Colonel Mitchell entered. Like he was still on duty, gray suit, pressed. Silver hair neatly combed. Shoulders squared like he hadn't learned how to walk any other way. He didn't look at the prosecutor. He didn't glance at the gallery. He looked straight at Dante. Then he took the stand. I'm here, he began, because this boy sitting here today, this young man, is being suffocated by the very system his father died believing in. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Elijah Wilkins wasn't just a Marine, he was a lifeline. In 2004, outside Fallujah, our convoy hit an IED. He was bleeding, badly. Should have stayed down. But instead, he ran back into the fire, pulled out 2 men. One of them was me. There was a beat of silence. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, gleaming his purple heart, laid it on the bench. And now, his son, the boy you're calling disruptive, is quoting First Amendment case law more precisely than half the law students I've taught guest lectures to. He turned, this time addressing the courtroom. You want to prosecute this boy for demanding transparency? Start with me. Because I'm the one who mailed him his first pocket constitution. Dante looked down. No tears. Just that sting behind the eyes. That sense of something ancient and proud coming up from the earth beneath him. After recess, Dante returned to the stand, not as a boy trying to defend himself, but as a son carrying legacy. A grandson walking through fire. A voice that, stutter or not, had begun to echo through a city that had forgotten how to listen. Judge Marsh looked at him, not from a bench, but from a distance she had, at last, started to cross. For the first time that day, she wasn't hearing a defendant. She was hearing a story. The court was about to adjourn for the day when Judge Marsh did something unexpected. She looked up from her bench and asked, "Is there anyone else present who wishes to speak on the character of the defendant?" A long pause. The gallery fidgeted. The prosecutor looked mildly annoyed. But then a voice came, low but clear. "I do." Heads turned. Mr. Ellis rose again. His knees cracked as he stood, but his presence filled the room. "I didn't intend to say more," he began. "But I reckon silence is what lets injustice take root." The judge gave a subtle nod. "You may approach." He walked to the front, slower this time. Not because he was weak, but because he was carrying something heavy. Not physically. Something in his chest, his memory. He faced the room, but his eyes stayed on Dante. "I first met this boy under fluorescent lights and bleach fumes," he said. "Not exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find a revolutionary." A soft laugh rippled, the first of the day, not mocking. Almost grateful. "I was pushing a mop through the library hallway. It was a Saturday, building supposed to be closed, but someone had jimmied the side door. I thought it was a break-in. Grabbed my flashlight, ready to swing if I had to, and there he was." He pointed at Dante, 14, sitting cross-legged on the tile, book open on his lap, reading out loud. Ellis paused, reading like he was fighting for his life, like the words were the only things keeping him above water. He looked at the judge. I didn't interrupt. I just sat down beside him, listened. When he finished, I asked why he was reading the Constitution. Dante shifted in his chair. He knew what came next, but no one else did. Ellis cleared his throat. He said, "Because my voice don't go straight, but my thoughts do. And I figured if I learn these words well enough, maybe people will have to stop and listen." The room fell utterly still. "I never told anyone this," Ellis continued, quieter now, "but I knew that feeling. I'd felt it once, 40 years ago, standing outside a courtroom in Louisiana, waiting to testify against a white officer who beat my brother. We lost. The officer walked. And I swore I'd never step into a courtroom again." He looked down. "But here I am." Then back up, because this boy didn't just pull knowledge from those pages. He pulled courage from them, the kind most men never find. The judge folded her hands slowly. "Mr. Ellis, why didn't you ever mention your connection before?" He let out a breath. "Because I didn't think it would matter. I thought no one would care about what a janitor had to say." He turned toward Dante, "But I saw something in him that reminded me what I'd buried, and I knew if he ever made it to this room, I'd have to find my voice again too." A tear slipped down Dante's cheek. Not from weakness, from recognition. The feeling of being seen. Really seen. The judge leaned back, quiet for a long beat. "I thank you, Mr. Ellis." He nodded once and returned to his seat. The gavel didn't fall that day, but something else did. The weight of assumption. The myth that a boy like Dante Wilkins, poor, stuttering black, couldn't carry the law like armor, couldn't inspire men old enough to be his grandfather, couldn't turn a courtroom into a confessional. But he had. And by the end of that day, even the walls seemed to lean in. The following morning, the courthouse smelled like old coffee and fresh denial. The air was stuffy, not because of the weather, but because people knew something had shifted, and no one wanted to be the first to admit it. The courtroom was fuller now. Word had spread. A teenage boy with a stutter had quoted the Constitution better than a law professor and made a veteran janitor cry. That kind of story didn't just stay in the courtroom. It leaked into newspapers, onto Twitter, even onto a blog called Justice Junkies, where the top comment under a photo of Dante at the podium read, "Say what you want about how he talks. He made a whole damn courtroom shut up and listen." But not everyone was a fan. Officer Briggs, for example, still had that smirk. but it wasn't sitting as comfortably on his face as it used to. He stood in the hallway sipping a coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the courtroom door like it had personally offended him. "You okay?" Greer asked, adjusting his collar. "Fine," Briggs muttered. "You don't look fine." Briggs exhaled through his nose. "It's just, you ever feel like the world's gone soft? Like suddenly, it's a crime to do your job?" Greer didn't answer. Probably because deep down, he knew the answer wouldn't be flattering. Inside, Dante was reviewing his notes again. Mr. Ellis sat behind him, eating a Pop-Tart like it was communion. Colonel Mitchell was back, this time seated front row, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, as if daring the court to test his patience again. Judge Marsh entered with her usual brisk pace, but this time, she glanced, just for a moment, at Dante, before sitting down. A glance that held no trace of condescension. Ada Warren stood and requested to call a new witness. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to call Principal Alfred Lowe to the stand, administrator of Roosevelt High School." Dante blinked. "Mr. Lowe?" That was unexpected. The man who once called him an academic liability behind closed doors was now walking confidently into the courtroom, adjusting his vest like he was on trial for a fashion show. He swore in, sat, folded his hands politely. "Ada." Warren smiled. "Mr. Lowe, how long have you known the defendant?" 3 years, Lowe said smoothly. "He's been a student at my school, off and on. Would you describe him as cooperative?" Mr. Lowe smiled, the kind of smile that was 90% teeth and 10% resentment. "I'd describe him as spirited." "Has he ever caused disruptions?" "Oh, on several occasions. There was one time he refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance." Few murmurs in the crowd. "Did he explain why?" Lowe chuckled. He said, quote, "Until liberty and justice actually are for all, I'll keep sitting." People laughed. For the first time all morning, a ripple of genuine amusement moved through the gallery. Even Judge Marsh cracked a smirk, quickly erased. Mr. Lowe looked confused. That wasn't the reaction he'd hoped for. Dante stood, voice calm. "Why, Your Honor, may I question the witness?" Marsh nodded. "You may." He walked up slowly. "Mr. Lowe, did you connote that my father was a veteran?" Lowe blinked. I did not." "Did you know he died in service?" "No, I wasn't aware." "Did you know that my refusal to street stand was a form of PR protected speech?" Lowe hesitated. "I'm not a lawyer, Dante. No, you're a principal. What our show should be protect street students who speak." Mic drop. Delivered in broken syllables. A chuckle came from the back. Mr. Ellis whispered, "Tell him, son." Lowe cleared his throat. Perhaps I was unaware of the full context." Dante nodded. You were." Then turned away, no further. Cue questions. As Mr. Lowe exited the witness stand with all the grace of someone realizing they'd just embarrassed themselves on record, Ada Warren quickly shifted gears. "We'd now like to call Officer Briggs for clarification on the defendant's actions at the scene." Briggs stood, straightened his uniform, checked his tie in the courtroom reflection like he was preparing for a press conference. Not cross-examination. He swore in, then took the stand. "Officer Briggs," Warren began, "can you confirm what the defendant was doing at the time of the arrest?" Briggs leaned into the mic. He was recording us during a sensitive interaction with a known vagrant. There was a slight edge in his voice when he said vagrant, and it didn't go unnoticed. Judge Marsh looked up sharply. "Mr. Randall is a decorated war veteran. Please use accurate terminology in this court." Briggs cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor, apologies." Dante stood again. No binder this time, just his hands folded calmly in front of him. "Oh, Officer B.B. Briggs. Did you say I was aggressive?" Yes, you refused verbal commands. Dante tilted his head. Was I assaultive? No. Did I rush you to touch you could cuss? No. Then. Chicken, you to tell me which part of me was a tough threat, the hoodie, or to the Saint Stutter? Boom. A woman in the third row muttered, "Whew." Someone else coughed to cover a laugh. Briggs shifted. It's about body language, he said defensively. Your posture was defiant. My posture? Yes. You mean? Saint standing still? Silence. I is scared you that I stood? Briggs squirmed. I just didn't want to be filmed. But it's Lulu. He didn't. Answer. Dante turned to the judge. No further questions. Before the judge could call a recess, a voice piped up from the back of the courtroom. Sometime around 2 a.m., another boy was brought in. Bigger, older, tattooed arms. Dried blood on his chin. He looked at Dante, said nothing, just sat, slouched, breathing loud. Then, after a while, you in for a fight? Dante shook his head. Boy raised an eyebrow. You talk? Dante opened his mouth, then stopped, lowered his head. The boy chuckled. Not cruelly. Just matter of fact. Damn, he muttered. They lock you up for talking slow now? Dante looked up, blinked, said nothing. You black, the boy said. That's fast enough for him. They didn't talk much after that, but when the guards came to move the older boy, he paused at the door, looked back. Don't let him. Make you quiet, little man. Then he was gone. Dante sat alone again. That sentence rolled in his head, like a marble in a box. Don't let him make you quiet. It reminded him of his dad. His father never stuttered, but he didn't talk much either. He let the radio do most of the speaking, old blue stations that hissed more than they played. And when he did talk, it was in fragments. Stand straight. Breathe through it. You're not weak just 'cause they think you are. And once, only once, in the kitchen while cleaning his boots, you ain't broken. Dante, you just speak in a rhythm most folks forgot how to hear. He had forgotten that until that night, in the holding cell. With the light that never turned off after they released him that night. After the paperwork and the cold stares and the silence that said, you don't belong here, Dante didn't. Go straight home. He walked all the way, 6 miles, shoelaces untied, backpack hanging open, sleeves damp from the drizzle that had started around midnight. He didn't feel the rain, didn't feel anything. Really, just the numbness that came after humiliation. The kind that makes you float, not like you're light, but like you're untethered. He didn't even realize where his feet were taking him until he saw the library. The one on Langston Avenue. It was closed. Of course it was closed, but the side gate was always loose. He slipped in, climbed the stairs, curled up under the awning where the roof leaked a little. And there, in the quiet, he pulled out the thing he hadn't touched in over a year. A cassette player. Old, heavy, taped up on the side, inside. One tape, labeled in faint Sharpie. Dad, October 7th, 2015, 8:42 p.m. The last time his father's voice had been recorded. He remembered the night. Barely. He was 9. His dad had come home from the VA hospital, sat in the kitchen, pressed record, and started talking. Not to Dante. To himself. Or maybe to the Vinu future. Back then, Dante didn't understand most of it. He just liked the sound of his father's voice. It was like the radio, low, warm, scratchy. Now, almost 8 years later, he hit play. If you're hearing this, I guess you kept it. Or maybe you found it by accident. Either way, hi son, a pause, a breath. I don't know what kind of man you'll be. I hope you'll be loud. Not in volume, but in presence. I hope your voice won't sound like mine. Not because I hate it, but because I've spent most of my life trying to make myself smaller, quieter, safer. Another pause. But you You got this way of saying things, even when they come out slow. Even when people look at you like you're broken, you say them anyway. The rain picked up around him. He kept listening. I saw how that teacher looked at you when you stuttered through your presentation. I saw you walk off stage and sit alone at lunch. I wanted to storm back in there and tell that room they didn't deserve to hear you, but I didn't. Silence again. Longer this time. Then, softer. I regret that. Dante's throat tightened. Not from sadness. From recognition. The kind of pain that doesn't hit like a punch. It sinks like cold water. The world's gonna try to talk over you. Son. Fast. Loud. Dismissive. It's gonna mistake your pauses for ignorance. Your struggle for weakness. But they won't see what I see. They won't see the storm behind your chest when you try again anyway. The tape clicked. End of side. Dante didn't rewind it. He didn't cry. He just sat there. Under the dripping roof. Holding that cassette player in both hands like it might still be warm from his father's touch. And then, he whispered to no one. The street storm's still here. It was the first time he didn't hate the way it sounded coming out of his mouth. Not perfect. Not clean. But true. The next morning, just before the sun had fully risen, Dante found himself walking again. Not in search of anything, not to escape, but because some silences only break when your feet are moving. The streets were still wet from the night rain, and the trees dripped gently, like they were trying to forget something too. His breath made ghosts in the cold air. He turned the corner onto the street that led to Lincoln Park and saw him, Mr. Randall, sitting on the same bench where it all started. Same posture, same distant look. But something about him looked older now. Like the events of the past few days had added weight to his shoulders that even time couldn't distribute evenly. Dante approached slowly. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Mr. Randall glanced up, eyes tired but clear. For a few moments, they just sat in silence. Two silhouettes on a forgotten bench. One young, one aged, but both marked by the same invisibility that wrapped around people like them every day. People that society learned how to walk past. Mr. Randall broke the quiet with a voice that was softer than Dante remembered. You didn't run. Dante shook his head. Didn't feel right. Randall nodded. No, it wouldn't have. He scratched Max's head. The old dog was curled at his feet, one eye milky white now, breathing slow and steady. They always look at the phone first, he muttered. But it's never about the phone. It's about what they think it might capture. Dante looked down at his hands. I thought if I filmed, they'd behave different. Randall let out a hollow chuckle. They do, sometimes. They behave more careful, still wrong, but careful. For a long stretch neither spoke. The wind came in light gusts. The park began to fill with faraway sounds. Traffic, a garbage truck, some distant laughter. Then Randall asked, They let you go? Dante nodded. The judge apologized. Randall raised an eyebrow. That happen often? First time for me, Dante said. Randall leaned back. Used to think an apology fixed things. Then I realized, it's like painting over cracks in a wall. Still broken underneath. Dante felt that in his stomach. Not in a bitter way, just honest. Randall tapped his chest. I got medals, got paperwork saying I served with honor. Still can't get a place to sleep that ain't on concrete. He looked at Dante. But you got something different. You still got time to decide who you are, what you carry. Dante didn't answer. He just looked at Max, then at Randall, then at the bench under them both. You ever wish you'd yelled back? He asked, surprising even himself. Randall thought about it, then slowly shook his head. No, because the ones who hurt you, they want the yelling. They expect it. What they don't know how to deal with is quiet dignity. That's the thing that haunts them later. Not the rage, the restraint. Dante leaned forward, elbows on knees, The bench creaked beneath him. The wind picked up a little. He said, "I don't know if I got that kind of strength." Randall looked at him, eyes direct for the first time. "You already showed it, just by coming back here." They sat like that a while longer, not talking, not avoiding, just existing, together, in a world that tried to forget them both. When Dante finally stood to leave, he offered a small nod. Randall didn't return it with words. Just raised one hand, two fingers, slow, a soldier's farewell. Dante understood that as he walked away. He didn't feel healed. Didn't feel triumphant, but he felt something new, not hope exactly. Not pride, but a quiet sense of possession, like his story, fractured and stuttered as it was, still belonged to him. And that, somehow, was enough. It was the last day of court. At least, that's what they'd been told. The judge had reviewed the videos, the testimony, the statements. And yet, something hung in the air like a story not yet finished. Like a breath being held. Ada Warren stood by the bench, shuffling papers as if trying to will something stronger into her closing arguments. Her tone was sharp, but her hands trembled just enough to betray her certainty. The state maintains that while Mr. Wilkins' behavior was not overtly aggressive, it still posed a potential disruption to a high-pressure situation involving public safety, she said, her voice echoing across the courtroom's high ceiling. Dante didn't flinch. He sat at his table, hands clasped, breathing steady. No binder today, no constitution. Just himself, stripped of anything that wasn't necessary. Judge Marsh leaned forward, pen tapping gently against the edge of her notepad. "And the defendant's final statement?" she asked. Dante stood. His voice didn't shake this time. "I did what I thought was right. That was it. No grand speech, no flourish. Just truth, delivered plainly." But just as the judge prepared to announce her findings, a man entered the courtroom through the side door. Dressed in a modest navy suit, his face serious, his steps confident but unhurried. He carried a folder in his hand and a badge clipped to his belt. The room turned. He stopped beside the clerk and spoke in a low voice, then handed over the folder. The clerk brought it to the judge. She opened it, read the first page, her lips tightened. Eyes scanned faster. Then she looked up and said, "This court will recess for 15 minutes. Her voice was calm. But something had changed. Everyone felt it. In the hallway, whispers flew like paper caught in wind. The man in the suit stood near the vending machines, unmoving. Dante watched him from a distance. Something about the man's posture, the stillness in his face, it wasn't aggressive. It was focused, measured, like someone who had waited years to speak and finally found the moment. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Marsh didn't hesitate. "Before this court proceeds," she said, "we have received new documentation submitted under federal record request. Mr. Wilkins, you may wish to pay attention to this." Dante leaned forward, uncertain. Marsh continued, "This document is a commendation letter, issued in 2007. It was written by a then Captain Richard Greer, addressed to the Department of Defense." Murmurs swept the courtroom. Greer shifted in his seat. His face began to pale. The letter describes an incident in which Sergeant Elijah Wilkins, the defendant's father, saved the life of Captain Greer during a mortar attack outside Mosul. According to the letter, Sergeant Wilkins shielded Greer from impact, sustaining injuries that later contributed to his early discharge. The courtroom froze. Greer stared straight ahead, lips slightly parted. Ada Warren turned to him, stunned. The judge went on. "Furthermore, it appears this letter was omitted from public record due to redaction protocols, but has since been declassified." She looked at Dante. "Do you know this, Mr. Wilkins?" Dante said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence said more than words ever could. He didn't know. But now he did, and so did everyone else. Greer didn't move. He didn't look at Dante. He didn't look at the judge. He just sat there blinking. Slowly, like a man realizing the earth beneath his feet had been slipping for years, and he'd only now noticed. Judge Marsh didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Officer Greer," she said, her tone smooth as polished steel, "would you care to comment on the fact that the man whose son you ordered arrested, a son who posed no threat and committed no crime, was the very soldier who once saved your life?" The room waited. Seconds ticked. Greer finally shifted. Cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I hadn't connected the name." "It's been years." The judge tilted her head. "You wrote a 2-page letter praising Elijah Wilkins' heroism. You detailed how he dragged you out of a collapsed bunker with a shattered femur and continued firing until medevac arrived. You closed the letter with the phrase, 'I owe him more than I can ever repay.'" She paused. "And when you arrested his son, did you feel any weight of that debt?" Greer's face went blank. His hands gripped his knees. His voice, when it came, was soft. "I didn't know." The judge leaned back. "No, officer, you didn't want to." In the gallery, no one spoke. Not even Ellis, not even Mitchell. People who had come in skeptical, even cynical, now sat like witnesses to a reckoning they hadn't expected. Dante didn't gloat. He didn't blink. He just looked at Greer with the same stillness he'd shown outside that park bench. No anger. Just presence. Just existence, undeniable and unmoving. And that, more than anything, was what broke Greer. Not yelling. Not protest. Not some big monologue. Just a 17-year-old kid, standing taller in silence than any badge could ever. "Make him." The judge looked at Dante. "Do you wish to respond?" Dante stood, walked to the podium slowly. His voice didn't rise. It was quieter than it had ever been in that room. "My dad never talked about medals. He didn't even hang them. He just said, 'Some debts get paid forward.'" He looked at Greer now, not with hatred, but with clarity. "You had a chance to do that, with me." The judge asked gently, "Is there anything else you want to say?" Dante shook his head. "No, ma'am, he already heard it." And then he sat. The courtroom was no longer a place of law in that moment. It was a place of memory. Of unfinished loops finally closing. Of names written down long ago, now echoing through the present. And somewhere in the silence that followed, Greer lowered his head, not because someone told him to, but because there was nothing else left to do. The media didn't arrive because they were tipped off. They arrived because someone in the hallway live-streamed the moment Officer Greer admitted he arrested the son of the man who once carried him through fire. The headline had already written itself before the gavel could fall. Officer arrests hero's son, then learns the truth in court. The clip of Dante standing at the podium saying, "He already heard it," hit 1 million views in 5 hours. But inside that courtroom, none of that mattered yet. Because what was happening wasn't about clicks. It wasn't about headlines. It was about dignity reclaiming its space. The judge cleared her throat. Not to regain authority, but to steady something inside her. "This court," she began, "finds that Mr. Dante Wilkins was wrongfully arrested, subjected to unnecessary force, and that his rights were infringed upon. No criminal charges shall stand." She paused, looked at the room. "But more importantly, this court recognizes the courage it took for a young man to walk into a place like this, speak his truth, and stand alone when no one believed him. That is not a legal verdict. It is a human one." And then something that rarely happens in courtrooms happened. The gallery stood. Not all at once, not coordinated. Just slowly, as if each person realized they could no longer stay seated in the presence of a truth this undeniable. First Mr. Ellis, then Colonel Mitchell, then students, then strangers. The little girl who spoke up earlier stood on the bench to see better. Her sister lifted her hand and clapped first. The sound echoed awkwardly at first, one pair of hands. in a room trained for silence, then another, until the room was filled with quiet, reverent applause. Not loud, not rowdy, but real. Dante didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just looked at them, each of them, like someone finally seeing a landscape with the fog lifted. The judge tapped her gavel once. Court is adjourned. She stood, but before she left, she turned to Dante. There's a youth leadership summit next month. They asked me for a recommendation. I didn't have anyone. I do now. Dante blinked. Me? Yes, Mr. Wilkins, you. He didn't respond right away. He looked around the room, at Greer still sitting, at his mother now walking in through the back door, hair still damp from working the breakfast shift, apron under her coat. He looked at Mr. Ellis. At Colonel Mitchell. At the child watching him from the bench with wide, unfiltered eyes. Then he whispered, I'm listening now. And for the first time in a long time, so was everyone else. It began quietly. A repost here, a retweet there. The video of Dante at the podium was clipped, remixed, subtitled, and reshared across platforms. People didn't just listen to what he said, they watched how he said it. The pauses, the breath before each word, the unwavering gaze. His stutter didn't become the punchline, it became the punctuation. A mark of insistence. A rhythm no one could ignore anymore. Within a day, the hashtags trended. Hashtag Dante didn't start. Hashtag voice like Dante. Hashtag let them speak. Comment sections filled with people who had once silenced kids like him, now admitting, I never thought about what it meant to interrupt someone trying to speak. Speech therapists, veterans, teachers, public defenders, they all began sharing their own versions of what happened when they finally listened to someone they had once overlooked. But the real shift wasn't online. That had happened at Roosevelt. High. It started with a single sheet of paper, taped to the wall outside the school library. A quote printed in large black font. You ain't broken. You just speak in a rhythm most folks forgot how to hear. Elijah Wilkins. By noon, students had started adding their own messages around it. Notes, letters, sticky tabs that read, Me too, or I always felt like I had to shrink. A mural began to form, not paint, but paper. Layers and layers of voices taped one over another until the wall couldn't hold anymore. The principal, Mr. Lowe, was silent for days. He walked the hall like someone afraid to be asked the right question. When a local reporter came to campus and asked about Dante's case, he said, I didn't know the full story. And for once, he didn't follow that with an excuse. 2 days later, the school board announced a new student speech policy, created with input from students themselves. Dante's name was on the cover page, not in cursive, not as decoration, as author. Meanwhile, downtown, an invitation arrived at his doorstep. It wasn't flashy, just a letterhead from the mayor's office. The city was hosting a public forum on youth justice reform. They wanted Dante to speak. His first reaction wasn't excitement. It was fear, not because of the stage, but because of the spotlight. He remembered what it felt like to be stared at, not seen. To be tolerated, not heard. He wasn't sure he was ready to go back into a room like that. But then his mother sat next to him. Quiet, coffee in hand, hair still wet from her shift. I watched that video, she said. He looked up. You know what I saw? He shrugged. I saw your father in your eyes, and your voice in your father's mouth. He didn't respond. So she continued. He would've walked through fire to protect your right to be heard. You walked into a courtroom alone. That's braver. Dante looked at the letter again. He didn't feel brave, but maybe he was ready. When he stepped onto that stage, a week later, the room didn't go silent because of who he was. It went silent because of what he carried. Not his file, not his record, but his truth. The same one they all thought would sound too broken to matter. He stood at the podium. No script. Just breath. And then slowly, I used to hate my voice. Not because it was quiet, but because the world only liked loud things, fast things, clean sentences. He paused. They used to laugh when I couldn't get a word out, but now they listen to the pause. Another breath. I don't talk fast, but I mean what I say. A beat, and maybe that's enough. The applause didn't erupt. It rolled in like a wave, soft at first, then unstoppable. Not because he shouted, but because he had nothing to prove. Spring came late that year. The city had just started warming up, but the air still held a bite in. The mornings. On the steps outside Roosevelt High, a bronze plaque had been quietly installed, not with ceremony, not with media. Just a janitor, a teacher, and a few students who asked if they could help. The plaque read, "To those who speak slowly but carry truth, you are not broken. The silence between your words is where the world begins to change." Dante walked past it every morning. Not fast, just steady. Some days someone would nod. At him, a kid he didn't know, a parent, a teacher. Once, even a former bully who mumbled something that might have been an apology. He didn't keep track. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in space, the kind of space where no one flinched when he opened his mouth. He still stuttered. That didn't go away. But something else had. The shame. Now, when he paused mid-sentence, people waited, not always perfectly. Not always patiently, but more than they used to. And that was something. At home, things hadn't changed much. His mom still worked long shifts. They still lived in the same apartment with the peeling paint. But now there was a new picture on the fridge, a photo from the forum. Dante standing between the mayor and Mr. Ellis, who wore his custodial jacket like a suit of armor. And beneath it, taped crookedly, was a sticky note from his mom that read, "He would be proud. I already am." One night, weeks later, he visited Lincoln Park again, this time with a book under his arm. Max had passed away quietly in his sleep 2 days earlier. Mr. Randall hadn't said much. Just sat on that same bench with a stillness that felt heavier than silence. Dante sat beside him, held out the book. It was the same worn copy of the Constitution. The corners curled. Pages full of tabs and underlines. He placed it on the bench between them. "You ever want to borrow it?" he said. "It's yours." Randall didn't speak, but he rested one hand on the book, and that was enough. Dante stood to leave, but Randall said quietly, "You made the pause matter." Dante turned. "The pause?" Randall nodded. "All my life, people filled the silence so they wouldn't have to hear what came after. But you let the silence speak with you. And now they finally heard." Dante didn't know what to say. So he just nodded. And walked away. There wasn't a parade. No scholarship check dropped from the sky. No Netflix deal. Just a boy with a stutter. A city that started listening, and a truth that no longer needed perfect grammar to matter. That was the end of it. Or maybe just the beginning. He didn't walk out of that courtroom with riches, no fame, no spotlight, just the same stutter. And a new kind of silence, one that listens. Dante didn't win because he shouted louder. He won because he never stopped speaking, even when the world tried to talk over him. So if this story made you feel something, even just a little, hit that subscribe button. Because every time you do, it tells the world, quiet courage matters. Voices like Dante's matter. And maybe, just maybe, the pause is where change begins.